Hello, Colemanators. After a very exciting sound check that amused our guest today, Lee Smith, very much, I'm going to spare you the very stupid road I was going down with wordplay. Introducing Lee. Lee is, as you are used to hearing me say, one of those people on the internet that I've known for years and who's known me for years. And this is the first time we are face to face with each other. Lee is, however, I will say it, he's at the center of things. Those who listen regularly will know that we had Amanda Milius on a few weeks ago. Lee is the author of the book that became Amanda's film. We'll talk about that a little bit. As you know, Lee, the sort of general theme of the podcast is free expression, censorship, cancel culture. You're a reporter. You write for a number of what we might call alternative publications at this point. So obviously you're intimately familiar. This is Lee right now. If you want to follow him on Twitter, Lee Smith DC. Actually, Lee, no. You're not in DC anymore, are you?
No, I'm not. No,
What's
I moved out, but yeah, we moved out last year. It's you know, I just saw that the city is once again under emergency measures. So we moved out of a place that is under a lot of pain right now because of different political exigencies, and of course it's political leaders. So it's a very sick and damaged and sad place, because it's a very beautiful city and a wonderful should be a welcoming city to all Americans and people from all around the world. Right now it's a dark and bruising, ugly place with high crime and high depression.
And is that really the experience that you had as a was that the vibe you were experiencing as a resident of Washington last year?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it started with the COVID lockdowns, and I guess that was March with the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And my concern was that this cannot help but lead to social unrest in major American cities. And I was only surprised it took so long, that it finally erupted with the George Floyd riots, the nationwide George Floyd riots. But yeah, certainly I was looking at that for a while. So it happened, and then my family, we decided it was a good time to leave. America's not only a great country, it's a big country too. And there's lots of wonderful places to live. And whenever I hear friends, and I grew up in New York City, whenever I hear friends now from New York or Washington or family living on the West Coast, they say, you know, it's a big country. You can live a normal life in other places and across America, and you should.
And not only on the edges. It's not as if the only alternative to New York is Los Angeles.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Or as we were just talking about Chicago, which has become where I spent 3 years in law school in the mid to late 80s, and which was probably the peak of livability for Chicago. I think things started to really go downhill after that.
So it's hugely sad. I mean, these are great places. These are our great American cities, and to see them on their knees like this, it's depressing. I assume it's depressing even for Americans who didn't grow up in cities. I mean, again, you know, people who would come to visit Washington, to see the monuments, to stand in front of the White House, whether it was Barack Obama or Donald Trump, who was the inhabitant of the White House. I mean, it was a marvelous thing to see people come from all over the country and all over the world to say, wow, this is where it all happens. And now these are very different environments.
It really was. I mean, yeah, I mean, Washington, maybe it's, you know, I'm just not cynical enough, but, you know, certainly, you know, when I had the privilege of appearing before the United States Supreme Court, listen, they built those buildings to inspire awe, and they work.
Yeah,
they were. And when I was privileged to attend the social media window dressing meeting that Trump had 2 years ago in July at the White House.
Yeah,
I'd never been to the White House before. Have you ever been to the White House?
I've been to the White House, but I wasn't at that meeting. It looked great and fantastic and a lot of fun. And yeah, but I mean, those again, to walk into the all the executive office building, to walk through the White House. I mean, yeah, these are marvelous places. This is our American legacy, and we enjoy sharing it with the rest of the world. And right now, what's happened is, again, it's under the control of a very dark political force, that I think many of us had thought would never exist in this country, but it does, and it controls many things.
Now, you're too good of a writer and journalist to have majored in journalism.
That's nice. Yeah. Oh yeah. No.
I'm guessing right, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me a little about the pre-journalism background and experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my father is retired now, but he was a journalist. My grandfather was in media. My great grandfather was he was the main type man at the New York Daily News.
Wow.
Moved from Indiana to the New York Daily News. So yeah. So
did he work in the Daily News in the Daily Planet, in the Daily News building on 34th Street? Because I used to work in that building.
Really? Yeah. My father tells me that there's a small plaque around where the typesetters sit, commemorating my great grandfather Hal Smith. So yeah. So cool. There's so my family's been involved in it for a while. So I understand how the press has changed in different ways.
You grew up among ink-stained wretches.
Absolutely, yes. My father worked at Newsweek and Fortune magazine, and so yeah. So I mean, it's a family trade. I know it pretty well, and I've seen how things have changed over the years. And I know that what we have right now, what we call the media right now, is not historically what many of us grew up with in the 20th century, or even at the beginning of the 21st century. That things have changed profoundly, and we're not talking about simply the political disposition of the press, which was always left-leaning. And that's where I started. In fact, in my career as a journalist, I worked at the Village Voice, in Greenwich Village, where actually I grew up. My brothers and I grew up in Greenwich Village, and this was the late 60s and early 70s, and it was a pretty wild time. And so the press has always been liberal, and I know that, and I understand that.
Were you with the Voice?
But what we're looking at.
Were you with the Voice when they started? When they published the atom bomb instructions, or was that a little after your time?
No, I came after that, but the atom bomb issue is very interesting, and I wrote about this when I was working more on Middle East stuff, and I was writing about the Iran nuclear deal.
Oh, right.
And the Obama administration kept saying stuff like, you can't get rid of the knowledge to make a nuclear bomb. You can't bomb the knowledge away. Once you've figured out how to do it, you can do it. And it's like, well, yes, this is of course. A friend of mine, one of my colleagues at Tablet says, I have the instructions how to make a nuclear bomb in my home. I could run all of Brooklyn with a nuclear bomb. The problem is I don't have the facilities, right? That's the difficult thing. The facilities, the ability to the industrial facilities to be able to manufacture not just the bomb, but also the tools that go into making a bomb. This is very different. The Iranians were not able to do that until the Obama administration made it possible for them to do that, and which the Biden administration, that's the deal. The Biden administration wants to re-enter. So sorry for the digression.
It's not a digression.
Happy you brought that up. I was like talking about that. Look, I mean, I remember when I was in high school, we had a guy, a Princeton grad, come in and say, yeah, I figured out how to build a nuclear bomb. So that's not the tough part. Knowing how to do it, Ron, if you and I mean, given a couple of hours and we could call friends on the phone, I'm sure we could put one together ourselves. Or
yeah,
the plans for it.
That guy might be one of my friends. In fact, he already figured it out a long time ago. Yeah. So you grew up in so you were in a position to answer a question that I always ask, and I think I know the answer, and I think you answered it already. In fact, which is, do we just know more now about how we're being misled, or are we being misled more by the media or the press?
Right.
What do you think?
I mean, I have my thesis is that the nature of the press changed profoundly because the financial model of the press collapsed with the advent of the internet. I was at the Village Voice. The Village Voice used to charge $1. And I was at the Village Voice when ownership said, no, we're going to give it away for free. I remember at the time they're competing against things like Craigslist and other things that were appearing on internet. I mean, the way the Voice made money was through its classified advertising. And this, of course, was the same with places like the New York Times, the New York Post, the New York Review of Books. They made money through classified advertising.
And the Chicago Reader was given out for free, which was the equivalent in Chicago of the Village Voice.
Right. And so what did that do? I mean, that told people right away that the information was useless. That wasn't only bad for the journal, or was what was actually worthless.
Was of no economic value. Right. Yeah.
Right. So that was bad for the journalist, first of all, and then for the audience too. So I'm like, this is, it's not worth you paying anything for it. So we see people, we've seen people still struggling with appropriate financial models. But what happened was that once that financial model collapsed and it was replaced by the internet, so the press became something very different. Remember what happened with the financial collapse. I mean, newspapers closed all around the country. There were people who actually knew what they were doing as reporters, as editors. They were fired. And one of the big things that happened was the really important but very, very expensive journalistic units, for instance, foreign bureaus, investigative teams. These are very, very expensive to run. So newspapers, magazines all said, forget it. Even fact checking, right? All these are expensive units. So they said, forget it. What did they do? They brought in instead political operations. And this is what Fusion GPS is, the famous producers of the Steele dossier. So by definition, then, the press incorporated political operations, because all of these Oppo research firms are paid by political interest, whether it's the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, whoever it is. They incorporated this as part of their model.
So I'm throwing up on the screen your book, The Plot Against the President, which I referred to obliquely earlier. You mentioned this was your previous book, of course. You're now the very
coup.
Sad and unfortunate next step in the process. And I want to talk about those a little bit later, but you mentioned the Steele dossier. And I noticed on your feed today a lot of excitement about what the Durham investigation is doing. And there's lots to talk about, but you can get that anywhere. And the fact is, it's fascinating to me that you and Amanda and those working with you have been able to get this message out at all at this point. Are your books available on Amazon? They are.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah. And, they did, the books have done very well. And I'm very happy to have had such a great audience and people who appreciate the books. And of course, I'm hugely appreciative of Amanda and the work that her team did putting together that movie, which is just amazing. I mean, I always say, whenever I've seen the movie several times now, but I've seen the trailer dozens of times. But whenever I see the trailer, I'm like, God, that looks so good. I can't wait to see it. It's really fantastic. And Amanda is just, Amanda is a fantastic person, a genius filmmaker. And so all of the work that she's done, not just with The Plot Against the President, the movie, but all of the work that she's done is tremendously important for all of our audiences and for the country. Yeah, there it is. There it goes.
You always watch it one more time, right?
Yeah, you're going to see me get really excited about it.
It is, and it is hard to believe that that this was reality and that we lived through it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so unreal. It's so beyond,
Right.
we grew up as we were kids during the Watergate era.
Yeah.
And we were sold a certain bill of goods about the relationship between government and what we'll call the media today. It used to be called the press
Yeah.
when you were, and law enforcement and the people.
Right.
Are the changes that you're describing, the economic changes, are they responsible for the distortion, the world where we have a James Comey?
Yeah.
Or there are other forces at work also, as obviously.
Oh yeah, no, there are other forces at work, and I don't want to get too carried away, but I think that a lot of the forces are spiritual as well. I mean, I think one of the things that I've argued for the last couple of years is that the fight here, the struggle is not primarily political, right? If you look at the different things that let's take the FBI, for instance. I mean, clearly we're looking at a politicized government bureaucracy, right? It was weaponized to target a Republican president and his aides. But if you look at the other things the FBI has done, for instance, with the Larry Nassar case, this was the U.S. Olympic team, the gymnastics team. I mean, and the FBI went in there. One of the lead agents went in there and was basically speaking with the U.S. Olympic Committee and saying, "Well, hey, you've got this great job on offer," and the idea was, I can make your troubles go away if you put me in line for this great job. I mean that's disgusting. Right. I mean, we're talking about young girls who were, little girls, who were assaulted by this, by this cretin. And here's an FBI agent, and he's trying to get a job. So that's very important in the sense that it shows the corruption is not primarily political. It's something else. It's a moral rot.
But I mean, isn't it even a sort of moral rot? Let's say that the FBI didn't purposely ignore all the leads with respect to all the terrorist attacks that we later found out they had leads on. Let's assume,
right,
like reasonable down the middle Americans, that was incompetence and not purposeful malfeasance. That's a kind of moral rot as well. And it's a moral rot that comes from a lack of accountability. No one is ever punished or disciplined. How do we get to that world where there's zero accountability for performing your professional duties?
Yeah, because I think they're all covering for each other. I like to use historical examples, right? If you look at I mean, you don't even need to go that far back in history, but if you look at powerful people within regimes, right, and if someone blows it, if someone makes a big mistake, right, the regime understands you have to get rid of that person, right? Or you have to push that person aside because that person will bring down the entire regime, right? What you don't want is you don't want the public, you don't want the citizenry going against, because the citizenry is always larger than the elite, right? Just in terms of numbers, it's always much larger. So you have to protect your own legitimacy, and you do that by getting rid of people who make errors all the time, who make mistakes. But that doesn't happen anymore in the United States. Instead, what they understand is exactly the opposite. It's like, well, that person is screwed up really badly, but if we try to take him down, if we try to move him aside, pulling out that one piece will collapse the entire house of cards. Anthony Fauci is a perfect example of this, right? I mean, this guy has gone from failure to failure for close to 4 decades now. And if you look at the COVID response, I mean, the way I see it, I'm actually working on a long piece on this for Tablet. The COVID response is effectively a cover-up for Fauci's failures, for his failed biodefense program. But this is happening across the board, right? You should get rid of James Comey. You should get rid of John Brennan, move these people aside, bring in someone competent. But what you talked about, the failures of the FBI, We all talk about, oh, well, 9/11, it was the firewall between the FBI and the CIA that was responsible for 9/11. So we had to break that down and we had to create a new agency, the Department of Homeland Security. That's nonsense. What happened was, I mean, the Department of Justice, you can look it up in the Inspector General's report. What happened is that a number of the different terrorists, two of the different Saudi terrorists, were staying at the home of an FBI informant, right? It was bad work. People should have paid. People should have been fired. Instead, what happens? Robert Mueller is hired as FBI director the week before 9/11, and he uses 9/11 as a platform to bring the FBI into the intelligence community to get more money, more prestige, more power. And that's the way our government is going right now. I don't know, it's hard to say exactly when it went off the rails, but that's what happens. People use failure to take more power. No one is held accountable.
Would you agree that part of the reason that happens is that government has gotten so big and has so many responsibilities and is so integrated into so many types of activities that everyone has a stake in the system, including people who cry about what one part of the system is doing to them without sufficiently appreciating that, again, pulling out that thread will undo their subsidy or will undo their, whatever benefit they're getting from the one hand that's washing the other.
Oh yeah, I definitely. I mean, because Washington is a big network, and if you pull at one thread, then the whole thing is likely to come apart. But there's something else as well, which again, I grew up in New York, and I saw moving to Washington. Again, I love Washington. It's a beautiful city, and I hope it returns to normalcy and even more so its beauty. But Donald Trump's famous line when he was talking about different people crossing our southern border, saying they're not sending their best. Look, we have to be honest that most of the people who go into the federal government are not our best, right? Whether these are Democrats or Republicans.
Janet Napolitano isn't the shining example of the best America has to offer the world. I mean, talk about someone who has spent decades failing upward and upward and upward and getting wealthier and wealthier and more powerful.
Right.
That's terrifying.
That's why they go. That's why they go there. These are not people who are going out, you know what, I'm going to start my own business. Here's what America needs. I want to be my own boss. I want to do this. I want to do. They're fundamentally bureaucrats. And that's what we need to understand about all of these different people. They're fundamentally bureaucrats. You can tell that walking down the street. They don't want to stand out, right? And that's why they dress the way they do. That's why fashion and style and taste in Washington is absolutely appalling. People from the rest of the country who go there, realize that these are gray people. They're it's terrible, right? But it's the same thing when it comes to matters of intellect, matters of ingenuity. These are people who know how to operate within bureaucratic frameworks. That's who they are.
And was it just too big of a dragon for Donald Trump to slay? Was that really, at the end of the day, why he couldn't break that?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. But I mean, it is also surprising because again, the former president was he was a man experienced in the world of business, and he knew how things work. I mean, there should have been a time when he should have punished someone very badly and very publicly, right? Whether it was James Comey, whether it was James Mattis. I mean, again, the bureaucratic mindset is not so tough to figure out. If you're getting a hard time from your number one, then go to the number two, right? Call in someone who's working under Mattis. Because these people are ambitious. Who wants to undermine Mattis and be the number one? So you go to the number two and you work to destroy the number one. It wasn't an impossible task. And at a certain point, when people started to realize that Donald Trump was making a lot of noise on Twitter And when he was making a lot of noise at rallies about the deep state and about how bad people were, but wasn't doing anything about it. But when he didn't kneecap anyone himself, they realized they could get away with virtually anything they liked. And that was a disaster for the country, not just for the Trump presidency.
So let's talk now, and that let's segue to the permanent coup, because we have a little bit of a paradigm change here, because you're talking about these people who are gray, who are apparatchiks. I mean, are we entering into sort of a Brezhnevian era in America now? Because I was about to say that, well, those people don't ultimately tend to lead, they tend to be led. But yes. I mean, we don't even really know who's leading the country now. We know we know who it isn't.
Right. Oh yeah, I think it's past Brezhnev. I mean, I think we've gone full on drop off here, right? I mean, that's who that's who Joe Biden is. I mean, you know, I've heard people throw that line around, but I mean that's you know, he's not even an empty suit. I mean, he's an algorithm or something at this point. I have friends who say, yeah, the problem with Major the dog is Major the dog realized it wasn't his master. Something happened to his master, and the dogs always understand. So that was the problem with the dog. Joe Biden is not there. Someone else is there.
Right. So that's an extraordinary state of affairs, is that, you know, at least when Obama was president, you had a person you could point to. And even if he wasn't really doing the heavy lifting, which he wasn't, he was still the man. Well, let me ask you something. Based on the work you've done in the permanent coup, a lot of people on Twitter, usually some of my best anonymous friends who have some of the strongest opinions, they like to blame everything that's happening or not happening on Obama. I even had someone assert last night when somebody one of my fellow lawyers was asking, who's paying for all the legal help in connection with some aspect of the squid? So I said, oh, the reason that's not traceable is because Obama's paying for it. Now, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. No. Obama doesn't pay for anything. But
right. Yes, right. Yeah, right.
How much do you think Obama is pulling the strings at this point within the permanent coup? Maybe it's in the book, and if I just would have looked it up in the index, I know the answer. It's only a podcast. Well, I don't even guys on TV don't read all the books.
Well, I mean, I argue that he's playing a very large role here. And you know, I don't think I would have believed that. I don't think I would have said that. I mean, even though that Barack Obama is the first president since Woodrow Wilson who has decided to stay in Washington D.C. That's a pretty big deal. And remember, Wilson stayed because he'd had a stroke, right? He couldn't move. So why is Obama there in Colorado still? Well, again, the surprising thing that we saw during the tail end of the Trump administration was that Obama kept sticking his hand up. Right, Obama, when it came to the Michael Flynn case, right, and Barack Obama basically leaked instructions on how to continue to go after Michael Flynn. That was frankly astonishing. I think different things. I think that Obama openly pushing on Twitter for mail-in voting. And this started in April. This started in April of 2020. So yeah,
but that's opinion leadership, though, right? I mean, it's unusual, but then again, there's no pushback from the media anymore, and there's not even pushback from the supposed opposition party. There's certainly no one in his party. You know, there was a time when a party like the Democratic Party would say, listen, we've got people on the bench now. You got to be quiet, ex-president, because we need to raise the profile of young X, Y, and Z. They got nobody but you know, octogenarians and incompetence.
That's the issue. All right.
So I get that part, but I'm talking about the conspiracy stuff, the stuff behind the scenes.
Oh,
what do you think? Obama, so much, not so much, less than people think, more than people think?
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell what people think, right? I mean, there are different parts of Twitter
What
where
does Lee
people
Smith
think that,
think? What does
uh,
Lee think?
oh, no, I think that Barack Obama is playing an enormous role here, and I
Yeah.
think that after Hillary Clinton lost, I hate to break the news to her, but after she lost the 2016 campaign, that's when you see the transformation of RussiaGate. Before the election, it was a campaign ploy, and they were spying on candidate Donald Trump. Now, Hillary Clinton has nothing to do with it after the election. After the election, it's Barack Obama. It's Barack Obama who tells John Brennan to write a secret, classified assessment about Russian interference. And of course, the key finding of that assessment is based on the dossier that Vladimir Putin wanted Donald Trump to win. So just that in itself says that at that point, after the election, Barack Obama decided to raise his hand and to take a very active role, if not the supreme leadership position in the anti-Trump opposition. He played a very, very active role.
Now, I mean, just for what it's worth, completely off topic, but it's my show.
All right.
When I heard that was supposed to be what Putin wanted, that's when I knew it was false.
Yeah.
Because it made no sense whatsoever. But back on track, what does Obama have to gain? He's been to the summit. Yeah. He's an incredibly wealthy man, for a man who's never really worked a day in his life,
right?
Or for anyone that matter.
Yeah.
Is it a love of power? Is that really enough to animate you? Because he didn't seem to be all that. Was he all that interested in exercising it actually when he was president?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because one of the ways that I look at it is, well, let's say, for instance, let's say, without going too far out of the conspiracy theory, let's say Barack Obama is playing a very big hand here, right? And we look at how incompetent the Biden administration looks. I mean, they can't get. I mean, their initiatives are nuts, right? But a lot of the things that the legislation they want to pass, they can't get through because they're people in their own party, and not just Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. I mean, there are a number of Democratic senators who are hiding behind Manchin and Sinema and who didn't want anything like the Build Back Better, bill. So if you look, this looks very strange, right? Well, how is it possible that Barack Obama is running this? Because he was all about no drama Obama, and everything ran so smoothly then. But if you look back and look at what happened during Obama's 8 years, what was accomplished? Right? Barack Obama had the press on his side. That's what Barack Obama had going for him. His accomplishments are virtually nil. And this is why he said things like when Biden was coming to office. This is why he talked about how it's very important to finish off things that we weren't able to finish when I was there. So I think that's the main thing. It's not just about exercising power for the sake of exercising power. It's getting things done they weren't able to finish. But remember, they assumed, like virtually everyone else, that Hillary Clinton, even if they didn't like Clinton that much, that Clinton was at least going to be a caretaker and make sure that things like the Iranian nuclear deal got, that these were solidified, and that the Iranians would eventually get their bomb within a decade. So I think that's the big thing. It's legacy. How's that?
Why do they want? Okay, so which is an extraordinary answer, because I mean I don't think it's meaningful to say, well, gosh, Barack Obama's an egomaniac. Anyone who becomes president is an egomaniac. You have
absolutely. Right. You have to be a sociopath. I mean, to even want to run for president. I mean, who else would do such a thing?
Right.
Can you imagine coming home and telling your wife, honey, we're running for president?
And I mean, we do see that people who have been president find it hard to give up the power. They find it, it's something that is difficult to give up. So here he gets to exercise it, and he can still take as many selfies as he wants. That's not going to change. A
lot of upside. Yeah.
But do you think they just guessed wrong at just how bad Kamala Harris was going to be?
No. I think that they knew they had a pretty, I mean, Obama had been talking about Kamala Harris. I mean, he had a crush on her. He expressed that pretty clearly. I think that they just thought that that Kamala Harris was just fantastic, and that people. I mean, remember how they judge things, right? I mean, I do believe that the progressives have a very different idea about political efficacy than normal human beings do, right? You don't even have to be efficient if you're a candidate of color. That in itself makes you an impressive figure. And I think that they looked at Harris. I assume that Obama looked at Harris as the female version of Barack Obama. So no, I don't. And remember all of the money, all of the Obama money was going into back Harris in 2020. I mean, that's where they were directing all that money. And there was
I think
plenty
you're
of time
saying
to
yes,
know how
then.
bad Harris was.
I think your answer is yes. They did guess.
Oh.
They figured she had all the necessaries, and all she had to do was show up and not suck.
Right.
And they forgot that was the one thing she absolutely knows how to do.
Yeah.
Is suck.
Right.
So there you go.
But that didn't matter to them. Because remember, their whole thing is, the whole idea with the progressives is, it's like, the problem is you don't get it, right? And if you don't get it, we're going to have to shove it down your throat, I guess, because we know what we're doing. The problem is you. The problem is the rest of the country. That's always been their idea. So do they objectively now think Harris sucks? I'm certain that they look at Harris's polling, aside from the non-lunatics in the White House, is like, what is wrong with America? What we've told you what's wrong with America. Messaging. It's racist, it's sexist, it's homophobic. Right. We got to sell our message better.
Our messaging has been yeah. So listen, unbelievably, Lee, or maybe not unbelievably, we have gobbled up 40 minutes here. So my question for you is, besides buying the Permanent Coup,
yes,
and reading it, and and not lending it to anyone, but making people buy it. And by the way, you should be very clear.
They should lend it out. Yeah.
When I asked you if the book was available on Amazon, of course, I meant, unlike the story that Amanda had with the distribution on Amazon, where, ultimately it dried up because they realized that they were carrying, they're not doing that with books quite, not all books. And you also were an established author beforehand. You'd written before on less ideologically, in a less ideological time, first of all. Yeah. But what do you think? What kind of things should we be doing besides supporting independent journalism? Or is that is that the main thing, or are there more important things?
Well,
get lots of jabs.
Yeah. Well, look, I actually think it's a fantastic time for independent journalism. I mean, between Julie Kelly and Darren Beattie, what they've been writing on January 6th is amazingly important work. And to be a journalist, to be a writer, I mean, it's a tremendous time. I mean, for me, Russiagate was, until we got to January 6th, and now the COVID, what I call the COVID cover up. Until that, I mean, Russiagate was just one of the biggest stories, ever. And none of them wanted it because they were all playing the other side. They were part of that operation. So there's a lot of journalists out there who are doing fantastic work. I mean, the way that different people are writing about COVID on Twitter and Substacks and coming out with different books. One of my colleagues at Tablet Magazine, I like promoting his books. It's really interesting. A guy named Michael Sanger, but who's been writing about how he understands the purpose of COVID, how the Chinese Communist Party has used this. The name of the book is called Snake Oil. So again, it's a tremendous time, and there's tremendous amounts of information out there because one of the things that we've learned over the last few years, even with the end of the prestige press, like the Washington Post and the New York Times, there are Americans who not only want and need information, as we see Twitter, Ron, you and I both see it, but there are people who are producing information on Twitter, like you, not just people like you and me, but there are people who are not professional journalists at all. They have no relationship to journalists, but they know how to find documents, they know how to read documents, and I've learned so much from them over the
It
last
is,
4 years.
it's
It's
been
really amazing.
astonishing what people are doing socially
Right.
and independently. And the fact is that for all the complaining we do, and I do plenty of it about
Right.
censorship on the major media,
Yeah.
the vast majority of people can get the job done if they stay within the lines.
Right. Well, even then, I mean, I think it's a terrific mistake for them to censor information. I mean, historically, we know that books and information that get censored, whether we're talking about James Joyce's Ulysses, whether we're talking about Nabokov's Lolita, whether we're talking about samizdat material in the former Soviet Union, the information that is censored, that comes to play a special, nearly sacred role in the lives of people. So, I mean, it's terrible that people don't have easier access to information. But once the state, once oligarchs, once the establishment tries to crush information, that information is still out there. And now it's even more important. So it's a profound mistake on their point. On their part, every time they will try to censor someone's information, that information will become more and more valuable. And they'll understand what that information means. So again, it's a profound mistake on their part. My wife thinks I'm often Pollyannish, that I'm too optimistic about things. But just looking at the broader historical sweep, I'm hugely optimistic. We're going through a very hard time right now, a very dark time, but this is a great country with a great a home to a great people, and so yeah, of course I'm optimistic.
Fantastic. I'll absolutely end on that note. Thank you so much, Lee. A real pleasure to talk to you in face to face, as I said again, and hopefully, I'm always used to saying I'm going to see such and such when I get down to Washington, and I really do. Now you're in South Carolina.
Yeah. Come down and visit. We've got a big place.
I will tell you,
a lot of fun. Come down and see us.
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you. Thanks a lot, and I really appreciate your coming on so long.
Thank you so much, Ron.